Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're watching or listening. My name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information that plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. For today's lecture, ladies and gentlemen, we'll provide another installment on our series on Mr. Algernon Sidney's Discourses Concerning Government. Now we're beginning Chapter 2, so if you haven't gone back and watched sections 1 through 20 of Chapter 1, I highly encourage you to do so, because Mr. Algernon Sidney is one of the individuals who significantly influenced the thinking of the founding generation, many of them specifically alluding to his work. So whenever you go about reading the Articles of the Confederation, U.S. Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, if you want to understand the foundation, the rudimentary principles, the exact ideas that the founding generation was thinking of whenever they were writing those documents and constructing their constitutions, the state constitutions and then the subsequent union constitutions, Mr. Algernon Sidney would greatly be to your benefit in that endeavor. A lot of his ideas, again, significantly influenced the founding generation. So let's go ahead and go on over to the Discourses Concerning Government. Like I said, we're beginning Chapter 2, Section 1. Now, this one is a very long section. It's about 16 or 17 pages. As always, please go read this section for yourself, just so there is zero concern about any sort of mischaracterization or misinterpretation that might be alleged. Mr. Sidney, in a couple sections, thankfully, states very clearly exactly what he meant to do with Section 1. And the rest of the section is dedicated to metaphors and examples demonstrating the very principle that he's articulating. And the summary that he gives in the header for this section is fairly representative, but kind of confusing. So I did my best when skimming through this work to highlight the most explanatory and articulated sections that really demonstrate exactly what he was trying to convey here. Again, please go read this section for yourself in its entirety. The only reason I'm not doing it here is to hopefully keep this brief and more easily digestible, so that way you're not bogged down or have too much of your time taken from your day. So without further ado, let's see what Mr. Sidney has to say in Chapter 2, Section 1, which is titled, "That 'tis natural for nations to govern, or to choose governors, and that virtue only gives a natural preference of one man above another, or reason why one should be chosen rather than another." So we have to remember that this is in the majority of this work is in refutation to Robert Filmer's Patriarcha. So Robert Filmer was the one who was advocating that there is supposedly some sovereign man in every generation, or just every once in a while that'll come along and is so self-evidently imbued with sovereign authority that no one can challenge it and has to obey it. What Mr. Sidney is going to say here is that actually the way that nations govern themselves or choose representatives to govern them isn't by who has the biggest sword or who can be the best bully or who is the most vicious and ferocious, but rather by reason and by an excess of virtue. And those virtues we can very quickly identify, because the virtues that are applied, if good, will be to the benefit of the nation, of the governed. So he's proposing here that there are a set of virtues, and he's kind of alluded to this in the previous sections, but there are objective, irrefutable virtues and qualities that when a leader has in himself, shows to be beneficial to the governed. And as he said very clearly, I think it was in the very first section of the first chapter, the whole reason of a government to exist is to protect and facilitate the citizens' exercise of their God-given rights, to protect the citizens. Because, as he'll say in this section, government is formed for the same reason. One, because men aren't angels, which means if left to their devices completely and exclusively, you'll have anarchy. But also because governments are comprised of men, who we just said aren't angelic, they also can't have infinite presumed power, because that just becomes anarchy with a few people at the top of the feed pile. So let's see exactly how he elaborates on that in Chapter 2, Section 1. He says, "In this chapter, our author fights valiantly against Bellarmine and Suarez." Now, Mr. Sidney is going to say here, one of the main, or probably the main reason I went and founded the Calhoun School of Law. It's precisely for this same problem that Sidney was dealing with in his time, seeming to think himself victorious. If he can show that either of them hath contradicted the other or himself, but being no way concerned in them, I shall leave their followers to defend their quarrel. My work is to seek after truth. And though they may have said some things in matters not concerning their beloved cause of popery, that are agreeable to reason, law, or scripture, I have little hope of finding it among those who apply themselves chiefly for scholar or for school sophistry, as the best means to support idolatry. That which I maintain is the cause of mankind, which ought not to suffer, though champions of corrupt principles have weakly defended or maliciously betrayed it. And therefore, not at all relying on their authority, I intend to reject whatsoever they say that agrees not with reason, scripture, or the approved examples of the best polished nations. He also attacks Plato and Aristotle, upon whose opinions I set a far greater value, inasmuch as they seem to have penetrated more deeply into the secrets of human nature, and not only to have judged more rightly of the interests of mankind, but also to have comprehended in their writings the wisdom of the Grecians, with all that they had learnt from the Phoenicians, Egyptians, and Hebrews, which may lead us to the discovery of the truth we seek. So our primary objective here at the Calhoun School of Law isn't to participate in school sophistry, to levy, well, I have a degree and you don't. Well, I had so many years of college and schooling, but you don't. None of that matters. Like Sidney said in a preceding section, none of that matters. None of the titles, none of the papers with ink declaring your supposed credibility, none of that advances the pursuit of truth. The only thing that pursues truth, or the only thing that matters in that pursuit, is doing exactly what we here at the Calhoun School of Law and what Mr. Sidney was doing, which all are welcome to do, by the way. There is no gatekeeping here. There is no requirement. It is merely doing what we at the Calhoun School of Law and what Mr. Sidney do. We don't care about titles. We don't care about how elegant you can sound. We don't care about your verbiage. We care about seeking truth to all expense and to every measure. And that's what Mr. Sidney is saying here. The reason he's going to prefer the opinions of Aristotle and Plato more than Filmer, or who else did he list? He cited Filmer and Bellarmine and Suarez. The reason he favors Aristotle and Plato over them is because Aristotle and Plato didn't show any signs of, well, you don't have a degree, so I'm not going to talk to you. No, they actually weighed historical examples and separated their personal biases and their personal interests from what is the truthful, honest, impersonal answer, unbiased, objective answer. If this be our work, the question is not whether it be a paradox or a received opinion, quote, that people naturally govern or choose governors, but whether it be true or not. For many paradoxes are true, and the most gross errors have often been most common. Though I hope to prove that what he calls a paradox is not only true, but a truth planted in the hearts of men, and acknowledged so to be by all that have been hearkened to the voice of nature, and disapproved by none, but such as through wickedness, stupidity, or baseness of spirit seem to have degenerated into the worst of beasts, and to have retained nothing of men but the outward shape or the ability of doing those mischiefs which they have learnt from their master, the devil. We have already seen that the patriarchal power resembles not the regal in principle or practice. So this system that Filmer is trying to suppose has two contradicting frameworks. He supposes that, of course, only the most morally and angelic of men will take power, but also that those who are the most ferocious, whenever they slay, maybe the most virtuous, are also to be equally subjected and obeyed, or subjected to and obeyed. So if it doesn't matter how the man came of power, which Filmer overtly says in Patriarcha, then why does it matter what virtues he has? If he can just kill whoever's in power and then immediately be owed obedience. So that's what Sidney is saying here. We've already dealt with the illegitimate argument that Filmer is trying to frame this idea of patriarchal monarchy to be placed in. That the beginning and continuance of regal power was contrary to and inconsistent with the patriarchal. That the first fathers of mankind left all their children independent on each other and in an equal liberty of providing for themselves. Further, he says, such as were wise and valiant procured it by setting up regular governments and placing the best men in the administration. So he's outlining, further articulating on what he stated in a previous section, where it doesn't matter the title. For example, you don't go to a physician because they have the title physician. You go to the physician because he's learned in the physic, to use Sidney's words. You don't go to a lawyer because he has the title lawyer. You go to a lawyer because he's supposed to be learned in law. And if there's someone who's calling himself a lawyer but doesn't know the law, you have no reason to go to him. The whole reason of the title isn't to be self-authoritative. It's to denote the capabilities of that person, of that individual. And if the individual doesn't represent or have those capabilities, then the title is worthless. You shouldn't consult the title at all. Whilst the weakest and basest fell under the power of the most boisterous and violent of their neighbors. So he's making a contrast. Those of the first sort had their root in wisdom and justice, so the good nations, the good governments, were rooted in wisdom and justice, and are called lawful kingdoms or commonwealths, and the rules by which they are governed are known by the name of laws. So they apply through wisdom and justice the irrefutable, non-negotiable facets and qualities of what is true, honest law, with a capital L. These governments have ever been the nurses of virtue. The nations living under them have flourished in peace and happiness, or made wars with glory and advantage. Whereas the other sort, springing from violence and wrong, kind of like what Filmer was talking about, where even if a vicious man went and slayed a virtuous king, that vicious man is now owed obedience, have ever gone under the odious title of tyrannies. And by fomenting vices like to those from whence they grew, have brought shame and misery upon those who were subject to them. This appears so plainly in Scripture that the assertors of liberty want no other patron than God himself, which is why in virtually every founding document you read through, virtually every one of the state constitutions in their original draft, and even some to this day, begin with a declaration or a recognition that the dependence of their righteous cause, or that the righteousness of their cause depends on the ultimate arbiter of justice, on the creator, or to use the Declaration of Independence's own words, nature's God. They're not appealing to self-sovereignty. They're not appealing to their individuality. They're not appealing to a Congress assembled. They're not appealing to a king. They're appealing to the ultimate arbiter of justice. And who is that? As Mr. Sidney said, it is to God. Those who cry for liberty, those who cry for freedom, again, don't appeal to themselves. They appeal to the one who gave them that liberty, who gave them that choice, that being God. He says further, but as no man can be just or desire to be so unless he know that justice is good, there's such an incredibly important maxim, not maxim's the wrong word, principle to use in refutation for anyone who says, well, anyone can be just, anyone can be good, anyone can be a leader. No, because if you don't recognize what justice is, then you're not going to recognize justice as being good. You may recognize, like a ferocious tyrant, well, whatever I do, as long as it benefits me, is good. That's not the ultimate appeal. Nor know that it is good, unless he know that original justice and goodness, through which all that is just, and all that is good is good. 'Tis impossible for any man to perform the part of a good magistrate unless he have the knowledge of whom? Of God. Or to bring a people to justice unless he bring them to the knowledge of God, who is the root of all justice and goodness. If Plato therefore deserves, so he's referencing Plato and Aristotle because Filmer tried to pervert what Aristotle and Plato said. He's using Plato and Aristotle's own words to contradict the perversions of Plato and Aristotle's words that was employed by Filmer. He says, if Plato therefore deserve credit, he only can duly perform the part of a good magistrate whose moral virtues are ripened and heightened by a superinduction of divine knowledge. The misery of man proceeds from his being separated from God. This separation is wrought by corruption. His restitution, therefore, to felicity and integrity can only be brought about by his reunion to the good which he has fallen. The weakness in which we are born. So here is his argument about if only men were angelic, we wouldn't need governments. But because men aren't angelic, we have to have governments. But also because governments are comprised of men, governments cannot be the ultimate determiners, cannot be infinitely sovereign. The weakness in which we are born renders us unable to attain this good of ourselves. We want help in all things, especially in the greatest. The fierce barbarity of a loose multitude, bound by no law and regulated by no discipline, is wholly repugnant to it. Whilst every man fears his neighbor and has no other defense than his own strength, he must live in that perpetual anxiety which is equally contrary to that happiness, and that sedate temper of mind which is required for the search of it. The first step towards the cure of this pestilent evil is for many to join in one body, that everyone may be protected by the united force of all. So again, it's important. Yes, governments are corrupt. Governments have always shown to inevitably be turned against the people. But we have to remember that a government, if maintained in virtue, is worth having. Because without government, just like Sidney said there, you're not going to have discipline, you're not going to have an understanding or an enforcement of what is truly justice and what is truly good. You'll just have anarchy. But on the contrary, and he's addressed this already in preceding sections, if you have a government that's unrestrained itself, well, now you've just made a group of either one man or a group of men that are anarchical into themselves, but diminutive and subjecting to those around them. The citizens abroad. Diminutive's the wrong word. That has control and authority over all others. So you can have total anarchy where no one has control, which in practicality, the biggest bully is going to become the new governing and supreme authority. Or you have a government which is anarchical in its own Congress that exercises arbitrary powers of the people. So you have to find that perfect medium. And whenever that perfect medium is disturbed in any way, Sidney and the founding generation reiterated, it's completely within the rights and the powers of the citizens to abolish or reform that government and institute a new one that returns to that base purpose, that foundational purpose of providing and protecting the citizens, not for serving themselves. This is an evil that Solomon detested. Quote, folly is set in great dignity, and the rich sit in low places. I have seen servants upon horses and princes walking as servants upon the earth. They who understand Solomon's language will easily see that the rich and the princes he means are such only who are rich in virtue and wisdom. So does that verse in the Bible mean, oh, well, if you're a slave, you're indefinitely a slave, and if you're rich, well, you're just anointed to be rich? No. What he's saying here is that it's evident there will come times where unqualified people will sit as governing authority. And that whenever that instance comes about, it is in direct contradiction to the structure of the nature's God, of creation. So does that mean if you're a slave, you can't, a slave in condition, ever become a governing authority? No, in fact, there are many instances in the Bible where someone like that, someone in that condition, goes on to be one of the greatest kings, goes on to be a righteous ruler. So it's not about your condition, it's about your character. Are you internally a slave? Are you internally a ruler? Because if you're a ruler, you're going to demonstrate these traits. And if you're internally a slave, you're going to demonstrate these traits. That's what Solomon was talking to. That's what those scriptures mean. That's what those verses mean. It's not about if you're poor, you're going to forever be poor and you deserve to be poor. And if you're rich, you deserve to be rich and forever to be rich. It's characteristic. It's internal, your qualities. That the rich and the princes he means are such only who are rich in virtue and wisdom, and who ought to be preferred for those qualities. And when he says a servant that reigneth is one of the, quote, 3 things the earth cannot bear, he can only mean such as deserve to be servants. For when they reign, they do not serve, but are served by others. Which perfectly agrees with what we learned from Plato, and plainly shows that true philosophy is perfectly conformable with what is taught by with what is taught us by those who were divinely inspired. So again, he's not saying if you're rich, you deserve to be rich perpetually, or if you're poor, a slave, you deserve to be a slave and poor perpetually. He's talking about if you are rich in wisdom and virtue, if you have the qualities becoming of a leader, there will be times that you're going to be kept away from that. And when those times come, that's one of the 3 things the earth cannot bear. That is a demonstration of a direct contradiction to the laws of nature. They who are equally free, so back to Sidney, they who are equally free may equally enjoy their freedom. But the powers that can only be executed by such as are endowed with great wisdom, justice, and valor can belong to none, nor be rightly conferred upon any, except such as excel in those virtues. So this is a direct contradiction to what Filmer was trying to say about hereditary, that's the word, hereditary patriarchal power. No, your son is not immediately going to be worthy of inheriting your privileges as a monarch. His inheritance of that authority, of that power, solely depends on how rich he is in wisdom, justice, and what was the third quality? Valor. There is no person immediately or presumptuously, that's probably the best word for it, deserving of authority. It all depends on whether or not you show the qualities becoming of a leader. No one is entitled to those privileges of governing others. And if no such can be found, all are equally by turns to participate of the honors annexed to magistracy. And law, which is said to be written by reason, cannot justly exalt those whom nature, which is reason, hath depressed, nor depress those whom nature hath exalted. It cannot make kings slaves, nor slaves kings, without introducing that evil which, if we believe Solomon, and the spirit by which he spoke, the earth cannot bear. Scroll down a little bit further. He continues. He that should pretend to the same privileges, without the same abilities, to perform the works for which they are granted. So just like we were talking about, if you call yourself a doctor but have no idea what a trachea is, probably shouldn't call yourself a doctor because you don't have the qualities, the traits, the intelligence, the information that is characteristic of what a medicinal doctor in particular would have. That goes for any other title. It doesn't matter if you're certified. It doesn't matter if you're approved. It doesn't matter if you're licensed. If you don't know the subject, don't call yourself a specialist of that subject. You don't go to a lawyer because he's called a lawyer. You go to a lawyer because, according to his title, he knows the law. And if he doesn't know the law, then he's not a lawyer. Same thing applies with doctors. Same thing applies in this instance when Mr. Sidney is talking about those who are worthy of leading others. It doesn't matter that you may call yourself a king. It only matters that you have the qualities of a king. Others see those qualities and they put you into authority. He that should pretend to the same privileges without the same abilities to perform the works for which they are granted would exceed the folly of a child. So it's childish to give yourself a title when you have no idea what you're talking about that title pertains to. Of a child that takes upon him a burden which can only be borne by a giant, or the madness of one who presumes to give physic and understands not the art of a physician, thereby drawing guilt upon himself and death upon his patient. So not only is it childish, it could be detrimental and fatal to those around you, to those who trust you. It were as vain to expect that a child should carry the giant's burden, and that an ignorant man should give wholesome physic, as that one who lives void of all knowledge of good should conduct men to it. So just like a child can't possibly, or just like it's childish to give yourself a title when you have no idea what you're talking about, just like when a physician calls himself a physician but ends up killing his patient because he has no idea what he's doing, the very same ideas apply to rulers, to governments, whether that be representative and elected, or whether that be a king who naturally finds himself in a governing position because the people, the citizens around him, were, one, in distress, and two, acknowledged and preferred the virtues, the wisdom, the justice, and valor that he exhibited. That's what matters. Not the title, not what the person claims, only what they demonstrate, only the character that they possess. So, to Filmer's argument, no. Hereditary power, presumed power, acquiescence to tyrannies and dictators who slay maybe righteous kings, no, they are not owed obedience. They are not owed infinite subjugation. The entire reason a government exists is not to have the title of government, but to exhibit excess of virtues such as wisdom, justice, and valor, and facilitate the citizens' exercise of their God-given rights. That's exactly what Mr. Sidney was saying in section 1 there. So if you have any questions about what was said in section 1, chapter 2, section 1, maybe questions about what was said in chapter 1 in those 20 sections, or maybe there's a question on a legal topic you'd like me to cover in a future lecture, go ahead and post those down in the comments, because the entire purpose of the Calhoun School of Law is to equip you with the necessary skills and information such as this to combat any sort of lawfare that will be waged against you, your loved ones, or your hard-earned property. So please, if you have any questions at all, go ahead and post them down in the comments. Excellent. So my name is Caleb Glick. I'm a lawyer here in the great state of Texas with the Calhoun School of Law to bring you a lot of information that plenty of bad folks would rather you not have. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and if not, while you're down in the comments, go ahead and let me know how I can do better so I can best serve that purpose of helping you. I hope y'all have a wonderful day, and until I see y'all in the next lecture for the next topic, I bid you all farewell.